Hello and welcome everybody to this Clear Seas webinar on vessel traffic forecasting in Canada's Pacific region. My name is Paul Blameris and I am Executive Director here at Clear Seas, and I'm going to be your host and moderator for this webinar. For those of you joining, can I ask that for the duration of the presentation that you turn off your videos so that you'll be able to see the speakers more clearly on the top of the video presentation. At the end, we're going to have an opportunity to do some Q&A. You'll be able to put your questions in the chat, and you'll also be able to raise your hand and participate, ask a question, and then you can turn your camera on for that. Thanks for that. So I think we've got most of the folks joining. We'll get started. Thank you for joining us. We're coming to you today from Vancouver in British Columbia on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I'd like to start today by really acknowledging the important role that First Nations up and down the coast of this land play in protecting and stewarding the waters that the ships that we're going to discuss today pass on a daily basis. So let's introduce our speakers. Joining me today is Tessa Coulthard, who is Research Lead here at Clear Seas, and Michael Cowdell, who is President of Westmar Advisors, who assisted us working on this project. So let's get to know them a little bit better. Tessa, tell us what was exciting about working on this project.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. And thanks everybody for joining us. I think what excited me most about this project was the opportunity to find out the answers to some of these big questions about cumulative vessel traffic numbers in different regions on the coast that we've been hearing about. So the Mapping Marine Traffic Program at Clear Seas is all about making shipping data available and useful to coastal communities who want to know more about what's happening out on the water. And I think that these forecasts will be a great addition to the collection of data we've got under this research program.
Thanks, Tessa. So Michael, why did Westmar want to work with Clear Seas on this project?
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul. For Westmar, we're more than an engineering company. We participate in the upfront planning and regulatory approvals for a lot of major projects, providing advice to project proponents, First Nations, government. We were involved with the navigation safety assessment for CLISMs. I wrote the Turnbull submission for LNG Canada. We've completed vessel traffic forecasts for other engineering work that we've been involved in. And I think through this work, I've come to understand some of the challenges associated with compiling vessel traffic forecasts using different data sources, and those different sources using different methodologies, routes, vessel categorizations. So for Westmar, it was important to work on this research and contribute to the breadth of knowledge Clear Seas has developed and hopefully improve vessel traffic forecasting going forward. For me personally, I was reflecting last night that our family has tied to the coast. My dad's family originally lived in Woodfibre, the site that's now being developed into an LNG terminal. And then after that, my grandfather moved to Ocean Falls, and the coast is always changing. Shipping's always changing. And we've seen LNG carriers come to the province for the first time. And, we may see other changes in the future for Canada, including Arctic shipping, shipping through the Port of Churchill increasing. So understanding these topics, I think, is important for Canada.
Yeah, that's a fantastic introduction. Thanks, Michael. And it really does bring it home to you. We're interested professionally, but we're also interested personally because we're all residents on this coast and we need to understand what's going on. So why are we here? I think you all have seen in the news, and when we started this project almost 2 years ago now, we had all noted that the Pacific coast was contemplating some major changes due to big infrastructure investments in ports and terminals. You can see they have the three important ones mentioned in the headlines here, but there are many more. And we heard from a number of sources that there's really no single definitive source for data on ship traffic patterns. Yes, obviously each individual project undergoes a detailed assessment during its approval, But there's nowhere to go that adds all that traffic together. And we heard this from the Coast Guard. We heard this from First Nations marine planning departments. We heard it from environmental organizations, even from interested members of the public. So that's why here at ClearSeas, we commissioned this study to provide that definitive source of data to help others who wanted to do their own assessment for planning and assessment of the changes that we are going to go see on the coast. And obviously, we are now entering a new phase of Canadian politics with a push for fast track approvals for major projects, just like the ones that we're going to talk about today. And we believe that the data source that we're providing here will be an invaluable tool in assessing the cumulative impacts of these decisions. So let's turn to the report and its findings. So here it is. It was published last week, and hopefully you've had a chance to download it from our ClearSeas website. I'm sure we'll put the link in the chat for you to take a look if you haven't. And it's important to recognize what we're talking about here. We're looking at large international vessels, like you see on the cover of that of the report here. And it's important to recognize that's only one component of the marine environment. If you look out of the window at the ocean on a day like today, you'll see a myriad of activity. You'll see ferries, you see fishing boats, recreation boats, tugs, workboats, other ships calling on domestic ports. So large international vessels are only one component of that overall marine activity. So why are we focused so acutely on that? Well, the answer is obviously, first of all, in the economic importance of what they do. Those ships carry the goods and the commodities to and from Canada that fuel the economy of not only Canada, but North America as a whole. And secondly, the potential environmental impact that they have. Those international ships, by and large, most of them currently carry heavy fuel oil as their fuel, which is a persistent oil. And so if that is spilled, has potentially major harm to the environment. So a really important component and category of ship traffic that we need to keep an eye on. So you can see the headline numbers there in the on the right that come from the report. Around currently we see around just over 3,000 vessels of this type of international large vessels calling on the coast. The forecast says that if all of the projects happen as they are planning, this could rise by around 60% to over 5,000 vessels per year by 2040. A major increase in tanker traffic, primarily LNG tankers, and we'll dive into that in a little bit more detail. And also a significant rise in importance of the north coast of British Columbia as a destination for international marine traffic. We're also going to look at the impact of this ship traffic on the service traffic like escort tugs, and you'll see the increase that those are going to see when we talk about that in more detail. So that gives you the headlines, but let's dig into how this was put together. Any good forecast needs a baseline from which to measure change, right? So Tessa, let's talk about the baseline traffic numbers and how we arrived at them. What kind of analysis did you and the ClearSeas team do to prepare that analysis?
Yeah, so we looked at vessel movements from 2016 to 2023 for the same vessels involved in this vessel traffic forecasting project to figure out this baseline of vessel traffic numbers on the north and south coasts of BC. We used the Pacific Pilotage Authority's vessel movement data to calculate the number of trips, which is publicly available and updated on a quarterly basis. For this project, we're interested in commercial vessels greater than 300 gross tons, which would include things like bulk carriers, container ships, different kinds of tankers, and then tugs greater than 15 meters in length.
That's great. Thanks, Tessa. So I heard you mention Pacific Pilotage data. I know that in previous analyses we've done, like the vessel traffic analysis, we used AIS data. Why did you use Pacific Pilotage data rather than AIS data for this analysis?
Yeah, we decided to use the PPA dataset because it's a comprehensive and cleaned data source that provides data for exactly what we're concerned with, which was vessel movements from large commercial vessels. There are some other differences between this baseline analysis and ClearSea's past vessel traffic analysis work that was published in 2021, like how we've excluded cruise ship traffic from our current traffic baselines and our decision to not include traffic from Washington State. So we developed these baselines to add context to the forecasted traffic from the selected development projects, which are all located in Canada and aren't cruise ship related. So that's why we made these exclusions and changes to our methodology.
Great. Okay, so it sounds like a perfect the data source for what we needed. So you're really confident in the numbers that we've got in our baseline. Fantastic. Okay, so let's turn now to the forecast. So Michael, we're looking at a map here of the 16 projects that that your team included in the assessment. How did you go about selecting them, and where did you go to get the data about those projects?
Yeah, that was definitely a challenging part of putting together this forecast, knowing where to go and find the different projects that have been proposed for the coast. We used a variety of data sources. We wanted to use publicly available data sources too. I think that's important to point out. So, all the data that is in the report is publicly available. Other people should be able to replicate the results that we have. So we reviewed regulatory filings under the BC-EAO, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. Some projects are under regulatory review aren't subject to those regulatory reviews, but reviews by Canadian port authorities. So the Port of Prince Rupert, Port of Nanaimo, or VTF-PR. So we looked at projects that had submitted applications to those entities as well. We used the Salish Sea Marine Emissions Tool that the team there had put a lot of effort into compiling quite a bit of
The Environment and Climate Change Canada team, right? I think.
Yeah, really good data there. And then there was Transport Canada Turnpole reports and a few other things like that we referred to. So it was, and I think one of the challenges too is that a lot of projects submit to regulatory reviews and often include a project description, which lays out the traffic that they are forecasting. That forecast can change over time. Thinking about projects like the Tilbury LNG project, there was a revised forecast completed partway through that regulatory review. So one of the challenges is looking through the different regulatory reviews and finding the latest forecast. So that was.
I hear you there. I think I've looked on one of those databases, and there's sometimes thousands of submissions, and it just seems to be knowing which one to download is critical. So thank you to the team at you and the team at Westmar for putting that together. So, okay, great. So that I guess is how we combined. We found the data for the forecast. Let's take a look at what happens when you combine that baseline that Tessa mentioned with the data from all of these project submissions. So here's the chart from the report. And I guess what this is doing is it's taking the up to 2023, that's the baseline data from the Pacific Portage Authority that Tessa mentioned, and then from 2024 onwards, it's the average of the historic vessel traffic added together with the forecast from Michael and the team. And you can see, obviously, the headline numbers there in terms of the major increase in tanker traffic, primarily from LNG tankers, and we'll dive into that in a little bit more detail. But then you can also see the purple bar increasing as container capacity increases, a small increase in bulk carriers, and then at the bottom, the vehicle carriers and general cargo continuing on, assumed to be kind of the average traffic, right, that we see historically. So a really interesting chart here, and I think kind of a headline. First question, though, I guess, is when I asked Tessa about what, we have 2024 actual data, which comes in at around just over 3,200 or 3,300 actuals compared to this maximum forecast of just over 3,500. So, Michael, what could be some of the reasons that the actual traffic isn't right up there with the forecast potential maximum traffic?
Yeah, so there's some important caveats that go along with the forecast. We didn't pass judgment on which projects were going to proceed or not proceed. So obviously some projects, that have gone to a regulatory review are not going to make it through to operations. We did see one project that was included in the forecast canceled earlier this year. The other thing is that terminals typically ramp up over a period of time. They don't necessarily reach their full forecast throughput in the first year of operations, and sometimes they never reach that full forecast throughput or vessel traffic forecast. So the forecast in a way, and for some projects we include a maximum and a minimum if there was a range of vessels forecast, but the forecast overall is very much like an upper bound prediction, and results could be lower than what we forecast, but that has to be weighed against the fact that there's other ways that traffic may increase on the coast too, through capacity improvements at existing terminals that don't have to submit to a regulatory review. So, there's other traffic that this forecast may not take into account.
All right. I mean, you can see that in the historic numbers there, the fluctuations in the container traffic and the bulk carriers as economic cycles and other factors go into effect. That's interesting. So, and we mentioned at the outset, plans from the federal government and the provincial government to fast track approval processes. Could you see? So you mentioned this is potentially an upper bound forecast. Could you see projects going faster than this? Could you see this number actually increasing up to 2040? Is there a way that could happen?
Yeah, I think we have different projects in different stages of development in the report. We put them into sort of four buckets: those that were in a regulatory review, those that had completed the regulatory review but were waiting on a final investment decision, and then those projects that had received a final investment decision and had proceeded to construction. And then there were some projects which, as of the time we were completing the forecast, were entering operation, so they were complete. For projects that are in the regulatory review, I mean, it's definitely one could see that those projects could definitely be accelerated given the current views on major projects and the need to perhaps accelerate some of them given our current geopolitical situation. For other projects that are sort of in that holding pattern, waiting for their FID or still reviewing their project economics, it's perhaps a little bit more challenging to see how those will accelerate. So in the forecast right now, we only have 3 projects that are still in the regulatory review stage, I believe. So it would be looking to those.
Interesting.
I think beyond that, there's a bunch of major projects that have been proposed that we didn't include in the forecast because they hadn't yet submitted a formal regulatory application. So second container terminal in Prince Rupert, for example. So we may see some of those projects accelerate too, and there may be a need to update this forecast sooner than later if that's the case.
Got it. Okay, so I take that to mean that the projects that are in here are probably going as fast as they can. It would be new projects that you'd have to add that haven't yet entered that approval process that could come on stream before 2040 that would need to be then added on top of this forecast.
Yeah, I think that's where we would possibly see the most acceleration. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. Thanks. So let's break that down geographically then, Tessa. If we focus now just on the North Coast, what kind of traffic increase do you see? Quite a big increase there. Break that down for us.
We do. So we could see as much as a 217% increase in international vessel traffic on the North Coast. Most of this growth is due to tanker traffic, specifically LNG tankers, with some LPG tanker traffic. And this type of traffic is coming from projects like Cedar LNG, LNG Canada, Siloams, and the Ridley Island Energy Export Facility project.
So we know that the Port of Prince Rupert plays a really important role in providing oversight and governance for traffic and anchorage management and aspects like that for vessels calling on the North Coast. How much of this traffic is within the port's jurisdiction?
But what we can see from these forecasts and the map of the projects that we've got too is that the increase in traffic is not limited to Prince Rupert. Kitimat will emerge as a hub for LNG tanker traffic, which is outside the port's jurisdiction. And the Siloams LNG project is also located outside of Prince Rupert. And this is the case across the coast, not just in the north. And this is because of the remote locations of some of these proposed LNG export projects in BC.
Interesting. So a real shift in the kind of traffic that we're going to see and characterized on British Columbia's coast. I guess you've done the same analysis for the South Coast. Not quite as dramatic an increase in percentage terms, right?
No, there will be more tanker traffic on the South Coast as well, and we're already seeing that with the TMX project beginning last May to operate. Vessel traffic is anticipated to grow by 45% in the maximum forecasted scenario, with the increase driven primarily again by LNG tankers, but also oil tankers and container ships.
Great, thanks. So probably a good time to ask that all these graphs and charts and the raw data that underpins them, those are available in the report, right, Tessa?
They are, yeah. Everything's in there.
Okay, so if you want to dig in a bit deeper and see what's driving these numbers, go and download that report. So in both of those forecasts, you've mentioned the importance of LNG and tanker traffic. Let's dig into that in more detail. I think you've got this chart here on breaking that down by project. Can you
Yeah.
dive into the details here a bit for us?
So most of the forecasted 61% growth in tanker traffic can be attributed to these LNG export projects, which are planned on both the north and the south coasts, as we talked about on the previous slides. There are some LPG projects forecast as well, like the Ridley Island Energy Export Facility project, and these make up part of that other category that you see in yellow. TMX on the south coast is actually the only project related to the transport of crude oil in the VTF project.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tessa. So, I guess tankers also have ancillary support traffic that goes with them. So one important category, I guess, is escort tugs. So we asked you, Michael, I guess, the team to try and create a forecast for what would happen to the increase in escort tug traffic, because obviously each tanker needs an escort. I guess for those that don't understand, escort tugs are those tugs that you see that serve as kind of a second line of defense to prevent an accident. If a tanker's engine fails or its steering mechanism fails, then you've got a tug. See there in the picture, a tug that is either tethered or in close proximity to that can attach a line and provide stability and steerage and stabilize the ship. So we've got a graph here. I think this one's just for the Salish Sea, actually looking at the forecasted increase in tug traffic. Michael, tell us a bit more about what goes into creating that forecast and what are the rules that are emerging for escort tug traffic.
Yeah, no, as you said, I mean, escort tug use is definitely increasing on the coast. We've seen a lot of new escort tugs show up, on the south coast and now on the north coast as well, with LNG Canada entering operations. The rules for escort tug use are covered under a variety of different regulatory notices from the Pacific Pilot Authority, Transport Canada, for Kitimat. The South Coast has other requirements under the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. Beyond the formal requirements, there are also projects that have made their own voluntary commitments, like Woodfibre LNG and the Ridley Island Energy Export Facility. Although that project is probably now covered under a new PPA guidance that was just issued, I think, in the last month or two for the North Coast, formalizing escort tug requirements for the North Coast. So if anyone's curious, they can go to the PPA website and take a look at that. The challenging part about forecasting escort tug use, though, is that the requirements often vary by the type of ship or ship size. So when we look at the tankers coming into the Burrard Inlet here, it depends on the size of ship, how many escort tugs you sometimes need and where they have to be used. Sometimes the requirements are based on mid-ocean conditions, so wind and wave forecasts or conditions at the time. And we should point out too, it's not only tankers, it's also container vessels and other large vessels. There's a PPA guidance for the Fairview container terminal up in Prince Rupert, for example. So when we looked at the forecast of escort tugs, we looked at just sort of the minimum increase, so the minimum number of tugs that may be required. It's hard to estimate the maximum number of tugs without having some pretty detailed information about the actual vessel size distribution that might be used on some of the projects. The other thing that's challenging about escort tug forecasting is that the route segments that escort tugs are required on are sometimes quite granular. Like there's a requirement on the South Coast to use escort tugs through Harrow Strait and Boundary Passage. So if we want to not sort of lump that traffic in with sort of the broader South Coast, we need to divide our route segments into pretty discrete sections, to have accurate forecasts for different areas.
Right.
So
yeah, thanks for that. I think it's obviously a really important and new category of vessel on the coast as well. I certainly know that from when I'm out on my bicycle or riding the ferry, I'm seeing more and more of those escort tugs. I'm sure everybody else can seeing that too. So something to really keep an eye on. It's good to know that line of defense is available, and not just to tankers, but to, as you mentioned, to some categories of large freighters as well. So let's open it up now to a bit of a Q&A. Feel free to pop your questions into the chat there. I see one coming in, and we can address your questions there, or if you prefer to do it verbally, put your hand up in the Zoom interface, and we'll allow you to come on screen and unmute your mic and answer the questions. But I see one's coming on there on the question of a track report, and it's interesting. Maybe I'll throw this one to you, Tessa. I guess from what I've seen, the data is kind of, it isn't like an AIS traffic because it's not completely spatially, but I know you work quite hard with the team at Westmar to kind of assign the traffic to individual route segments. Maybe you can talk about how you can use that then to create kind of spatial analysis reports.
Yeah, so we're able to take these forecasts and kind of zoom into the regions that are of interest to us or a community, and filter the forecast numbers to get a sense of how traffic might be impacted on a specific marine route. So the area of water that a vessel would take in transit. And we can see that by a certain project, so to that level. We can change this forecast number to be a minimum or a maximum scenario too. So having the ability to break down the forecast data like this in a spatial way is very exciting to me, and maybe to other nerdy map people out there as well who could be interested in overlaying the vessel traffic data that we have with other geographic data sets for
Fascinating. So you can kind of create a mini forecast for a region of interest and see if the traffic will go through that area. Interesting. And then you can combine that with AIS data if you want to, I guess.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Good. And I see some questions coming in about cruise ships again. I guess let's chat about cruise ships. Clearly a really important component of traffic on the coast. And I think we've got, if you want to understand more about cruise traffic, we've got our report from our vessel traffic analysis really dives into that. I think we clarified earlier on about the fact that this forecast is based on new terminal projects going through environmental assessment. And so there may be changes in cruise ship traffic due to economic conditions or cruise business decisions, but these are not terminal decisions. So that's why we didn't put them in. Clearly an important category. Is that right, Michael?
Yeah, no, that's correct. And we did actually look into it. We did investigate to see whether we could include a forecast for cruise ship vessels, but we talked to a variety of people in industry to see if there was something factual we could point to, which would be available to the public. And we didn't really find any sort of near to medium term cruise ship forecasts for Canadian waters. I guess, Paul, that ties into some of the other things that we talked about in terms of this forecast. There are other ways that you can look at a vessel traffic forecast going forward, especially into the longer term, taking into account various macroeconomic factors and things like that. And
well, for sure. I mean, we saw in COVID with discussions about Jones Act and the fact that the stop in Victoria for those cruise ships is potentially up for debate. And so I guess political decisions as well economic decisions can drive traffic changes, not just new infrastructure. Interesting. Maybe a good topic for a future report though on cruise ship traffic. I know it's something that everyone's really interested in. Okay, we're looking down the list here. I think some questions about underwater noise, obviously a really important topic, and we've got a fantastic series, and I think Megan has put the link in the chat there too on underwater noise mitigation and the kind of technologies that are being developed to help mitigate that, because obviously these ships do come with environmental impact, and of course also to do the support vessels like the escort tugs come with a noise signature. So there's a lot of work being done to mitigate that, and you can see some of that in the article series that's in the chat there. Another question here on the Coast Guard. Yes, I mentioned the Coast Guard has been very instrumental as both a financial supporter of this, to provide some of the funding to help us to get this done, but also obviously Coast Guard's involved in those impact assessments, and so in helping us assemble a list of projects to be assessed, and then obviously also in helping be a good customer for this, because they obviously want to use this data to help understand what kind of readiness they need, what resources they're going to need in terms of vessel traffic services operators, in terms of emergency response, in terms of search and rescue, all of the resources that they're going to need. So they've really been a helpful partner in putting this together, and it's something we want to work on with them in terms of providing this kind of analysis for other regions of Canada as well.
And I just, Paul, to add to that too, I think it's important to point out, we didn't get into it in the presentation, but well, Tessa touched on the traffic to Kitimat, but if other projects like Sea Lisms go ahead, we're looking at a different type of shipping into a part of the Canadian West Coast that typically hasn't seen that significant, degree of commercial shipping. So from a Coast Guard perspective, some of these are new routes that we're looking at, and definitely new traffic on new routes. So quite a bit of importance to look at how that might play out in the coming years.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We've got some questions coming in, and I was thinking about it as well. The fact that the projects that are included, some of them might be regarded to be in competition. So for instance, Roberts Bank 2 and Delta Port expansion, or even some of the LNG projects you might say, well, could they really all go ahead? So I guess we've got a list of the projects in their current state of approval in here. Michael, maybe you can talk a bit about how we should read this and think about the potential conflicting or complementary aspects to some of the projects and their status.
Yeah, again, we base the forecast on publicly available information, and we tried as best we could to stick with dates that were published in the literature that we reviewed. So the only times we tried to make an adjustment was if the project's documented start date had already been passed, then we made some assumptions in terms of when it might be approved and when it might then enter operations. Some of the projects obviously do compete with one another. GCT Delta Port, Roberts Bank Terminal 2. Roberts Bank, we should point out here, we have it as being under review and not in the FID bucket. But I think, to be fair, the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority has announced that they're going ahead with the procurement for Roberts Bank Terminal 2. So we could very much extend it out into that second box. GCT Delta Port remains under regulatory review. So at least in terms of approvals behind Roberts Bank. I think some people would suggest that perhaps we should assign probabilities to these projects, and that was something we considered. The problem with that is that there's fairly sparse data in terms of, which, for a number of projects that are proposed, how many actually make it through to operations. There's a few papers out there about that, but not many for Canada. And then, when you get beyond the review part, and you're into the FID and construction piece, those are very much commercial decisions. And we didn't really feel that it was up to us to pass judgment on which projects had a stronger or weaker, perhaps, commercial prospect. So right now, we assume all these projects do go ahead when they say they will, but the reality is that they'll continue to evolve, and some may drop off, some may be extended. We may see GCT Delta Port and Roberts Bank Terminal 2 both enter operations at some point, likely not at the same time. But we could see both of them enter operations in the coming decade or two.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of that interface between the discrete project approvals and then a broader kind of trade flow analysis that would need to take you out into the sort of 2050 region. If you believe that, Canadian trade flows are going to change, then you'd need to kind of model the impact of that on a ship basis. And do you think do you think this data is helpful in that? I mean, could you use this as a basis to do something like kind of that transition between medium-term forecast like this and a long-term forecast based on kind of GDP growth?
Yeah, no, I think that would be a interesting sort of second step to a forecast like this. Would be a forecast like this is really, we feel that it's really only good for maybe the next 10 to 15 years. So, we've a lot of these projects, and for Roberts Bank Terminal 2 and GCT, I mean, we're talking about start dates that are out into the 2030s, approaching 2040. So that's sort of the time horizon for this forecast based on these regulatory submissions. There's obviously a period after that that people may be interested in, and it would even overlap, I would say, starting probably 2030, 2035. But that sort of medium to long-term forecast would be based more on macroeconomics, market demand, market supply, available port land. We have a lot of really great ports across Canada, but there's a limited amount of developable land, and not all industries will continue to just grow at the rates that they always have. Some may be constrained by different factors, and those are definitely things that could be looked at going forward. We've seen shifts though too in Canada. I mean, on the West Coast here, we've had, I think, 3 new grain terminals built in the last decade, and that's quite a shift, in some of the market supply for grain, for example. So it continues to evolve that way.
Yeah, thanks for that insights. Just looking back at the questions here, so I see one on plans to model the increase of ambient underwater noise from vessels from this forecast. So that's a great kind of application of this data set. So I know that the cumulative effect of marine shipping project under the Oceans Protection Plan team have worked on a backward-looking noise forecast. A backward-looking noise assessment. But this is obviously, and I know that they have this data, so I think there is a plan to actually do it. Obviously, it's an easy way to now say you can put this incremental traffic from the graph into your noise assessment. You've got vessel types from here. You can apply the same noise emissions factors, and you can create that kind of spatial data like the assessment that Tessa was talking about if you want to combine historic data with this. So a great example of an application, and I believe that is part of the plan from the cumulative effects of marine shipping project to undertake that analysis for the coast. But it's equally well something that can be done on a more regional basis now as well, if you want to do that just for a particular region of interest. We've got a question here about political changes, so the Restoring America's Maritime Dominance Act and changes to tax on Chinese-built vessels entering U.S. ports and charging fees. So I think that's important. I guess we talked about political changes can have major shifts in the impact and things that just looking at the terminal sizes are not going to give you. So I don't think this forecast is going to give you an answer to the political question. It will give you an answer to what is the maximum capacity if somebody's determined to do that. So for instance, if we see much more freight that's destined for the North America arriving in Canadian ports, how large could that grow? Well, the answer is then you'd want to have to accelerate all of the expansion in container vessel terminal traffic, and then this upper bound container forecast would help you with that. And I think that's part of this question about linkage between traffic in the north and south coasts. No, this is a different question. So yeah, that's a good question about it pertains to the linkage between north and south coasts. So I think for those that don't know, and if you look at the particularly container traffic, vessels call on a route, so they'll arrive in Prince Rupert, having come in north of Haida Gwaii, and then they'll proceed down through Hecate Strait and come to Vancouver. So actually you get kind of 2 different movements. So maybe Michael and Tessa, can you answer how did we deal with that, and what are the kind of limitations on what we've done?
Yeah, we were aware of that potential, and like you said, Paul, I mean that exists for container traffic. Some bulk carriers as well will visit one terminal and load up one hold with one bulk commodity and then go to another terminal. So that can also be quite common, like liquid and dry bulk, actually, that's possible. I think for a lot of the projects, I don't know if we can bring up that slide again, but for LNG and LPG in particular, those run on very, very tight, very well-defined schedules. So those are all, those will very much be into port and then right back out the way they came. So I don't think it's much. There's not very many projects here that would have that factor with them. The ones
Probably
that
containers, right? I think the questioner is right that says there's a potential double accounting that says the same ship could be calling on the north coast and on the south coast as part of its.
and that evolves too, because the different container terminals cater to different shipping lines, and those shipping lines adjust their schedule. So yes, there's definitely container ships that come into Prince Rupert and then come down to the south coast, but that can happen one year and then will not happen the next year. So it's it's hard to predict that. So right now we assume that the traffic, assume the traffic that comes into these terminals comes in along the shipping routes that they identified in their regulatory applications. And for the most part, I think most projects had an assumed route that they were basing their traffic projections on. Where there wasn't one, we obviously would have made some assumptions from open ocean to the terminal.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Here's one for you, Tessa, asking about the Coast Guard vessel traffic services data. So I know we did do a bit of analysis of that, of the raw data from I guess this is the information that vessel traffic services operators get during their radio call-ins, and we did plow through that. Maybe talk a bit about that as a potential data source as compared to the Pacific Pilotage Authority. What did we find?
Yeah, we decided to go with the Pacific Pilotage Authority dataset because, well, it's updated on that quarterly basis, which we found really helpful, and having it be publicly accessible was great. We also, the vessel movements that are reported through the Pacific Pilotage data were really important for us in our ability to track vessels easily as they go along their journey. So that's kind of why we decided to stick with that source. There are lots of different ways you can quantify vessel traffic with lots of different data sources. So we went with what worked for us for the specific project, but we might use the Canadian Coast Guard's data assets for a different project in the future.
Right, thanks, Tessa. We've got a question here about anchorages, and clearly a major topic on the coast right now. I think this one mentions the 33 anchorages in the Southern Gulf Islands and emergency response. Interestingly, though, although we've seen increasing use of anchorages over the past years with that increase in bulk traffic, the new terminal projects are not likely, I think, to have such an increased demand on at least those Gulf Island anchorages, because primarily the Gulf Island anchorages are used by bulk carriers. So I think so something that Clear sees is interesting. Is that right, Michael? I don't know of those projects. Do we think there will be a large increase in anchorage use?
I don't think so. Like you said, it would probably be primarily bulk. I think for the most part, container vessels, and definitely for the tankers that we're looking at in this forecast, the tankers, if you look at the regulatory submissions for all those projects, they all state that they will not go to anchorage. The only time that would happen is if there was something unusual happening. We did think about the anchorage use, and for one of the projects, the Delta Grinding project, we actually did include the transits to and from anchorages, because for that project, they actually, in their first phase of development, would be bringing in larger bulk carriers to an anchorage and then lightering to barges. And so people will see that there is a mention of a route segment that goes over to an anchorage and then back to the Fraser River.
Okay, right. So that's an important, and I know that's a big topic of discussion right now about transferring in anchorage as well. So this data can help with understanding the potential impact of that. That's interesting. I see here Paula from Cumulative Effects of Marine Shipping Project has said that she's pointed to the fact the backward-looking report I mentioned on underwater noise impact of traffic. And Paula, maybe you can confirm. I was implying that you were going to potentially use this report to conduct a forward-looking impact on noise with JASCO. Maybe you can confirm whether that's part of the plans or not in the chat there. let's see what else. We've got a question about a cruise traffic, again on cruise traffic. I think these are fantastic inputs, and I'd actually love to see a concerted effort on cruise in particular, because you mentioned Nanaimo. I think we've got Victoria. I think an effort to look at what is the current status of cruise traffic and what is the potential impact, I think is a good idea for a future study. So thank you for these inputs, everybody. And then I think there's some detailed questions from Brenda on differences in PPA and Coast Guard.
I can talk a little bit more about how we visualize vessel traffic data. So at Clear Seas, we have on our research team quite a few GIS people. So we do have mapping software that we use to work with spatial data, especially vessel traffic data. And we have different data sources that we use for different types of projects, like I mentioned. So the Pacific Pilotage Authority data is not spatial necessarily. It's not vessel track lines that we're mapping out, but we are processing it with the help from a wonderful co-op student that we have this year, Eaton, who runs a Python script or a macro in Excel to link trips together through that Excel data that we're getting from the Pacific Pilotage Authority to quantify vessel movements. We've compared those counts that we have from that data set to AIS derived, or track lines derived from AIS data, which is another type of vessel traffic data, to make sure that we're kind of we're getting the same numbers out of those two different methodologies to assess vessel traffic. So for this specific project, we said the PPA data is accurate for our purposes to add context to the forecast that we have for these projects. So we are confident that it's a good data source.
Sounds like we've got the right team on the job. Let's start to wrap. I've got one final question I see here before we wrap up, which is it's a good one. It's on the interplay between traffic forecast and work on emergency towing vessel needs. So if you haven't seen it before, Clear Seas, since its founding, has been active in discussing the need for emergency towing vessels. So these are rescue vessels that can go to the assistance of a ship that gets into trouble off the coast, get a tow line to it and provide stability, and maybe even rescue that vessel and prevent it running aground and spilling its fuel oil or its cargo. So really important. And I guess all of that assessment that we did was done based on historic vessel traffic patterns in terms of the potential need for a vessel. So I think really good question that says this is a great application of this data set. We should update that assessment, and particularly, LNG carriers are quite high-sided. In a storm, they are subject to quite a lot of high forces from wind and could drift quite quickly. So I think an assessment of this forecast and its implications for emergency towing vessel needs is a great follow-on question. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap it up here, and thanks for all your questions in the comments in the chat. I just leave it to thank Michael and Tessa, our two speakers, for a great discussion today, and thank you to all of you for joining us.